Welcome back again. It's almost Shabbos, and I'd like to share with you another Dvar Torah. So little Max's mother comes very upset into the school, comes straight to the teacher and starts screaming at her. I heard yesterday that you smacked my little Max in the face, and I know he's very wild, and there isn't much you could do with him, but you should know that as well as being wild, he's very sensitive, and he could suffer a lot of trauma for the rest of his life from the smack you gave him. Please don't do that again. Teacher says, he's so wild, what should I do? Glue him to his seat, staple him down. I really don't know what to do. Max's mother thinks for a second and says, I have an idea. Smack the kid next to Max, and he'll get the message. This week's parsha begins with God telling Moses, tell the Kohanim that they should say, Emor ela Kohanim b'nei Aaron, tell the Kohanim, the sons of Aaron, v'amarta aleim, and say to them. Now, if it said, tell them so-and-so, and then said again, tell them so-and-so, it would make sense. But it says, tell them, and then it says what to tell them. It seems to be redundant. What is the meaning of this? So Rashi immediately explains, Emor v'amarta. Why does it say it twice? Lahazir hagdolim alaktanim. It is the authority of the elders of the Kohanim to teach the youngers of the Kohanim. And what are they to teach them? What is the special mitzvah that we are commanded in this week's parsha, that the older Kohanim need to teach the younger Kohanim to be careful not to defile themselves with a dead body, which is impure. Now this is very interesting because we know we try to include our children in all sorts of rituals. We try to have them say the Shema, and we bring them to synagogue, but that's all rabbinical decree. Only 3 times in the Torah are we told explicitly we need to teach this to our children, and this is one of the times. You know what the other 2 times were? Just 2 parshas ago, in Parshas Shemini, when it talked about not eating creepy crawlers, it said it twice, and the Talmud tells us, the reason it tells us twice is that you should make sure that you don't give creepy crawlers to your children to eat, or don't allow them to eat creepy crawlers. In other words, little insects or vermin, or something like that. Wow. And then, to add to that, the 3rd and final time, which was last week we read in Parshas Achrei Mot, that you shouldn't have the blood of an animal. There it also says it twice, and the Talmud extracts from there, you shouldn't do it, and you should make sure your children don't do it. So think of that. From all the mitzvot in the Torah, and all the temptations that humanity has, and the 10 Commandments, and all those very important things in Judaism, 3 times these very seemingly strange or inconspicuous mitzvot, only these 3 were told to make sure our children go on the straight and the narrow. Why is that? There's got to be some sort of common denominator, and let me tell you, the lesson from this, if it was only for nowadays, right now in the situation we're living in, that would be enough. Dayenu, it would be enough. So there are 3 situations where a parent could get frustrated when it comes to educating their children. Or not just a parent, a teacher, or any type of educator. Sometimes you have a child with severe character flaws. They're very wild. They're very insolent. They have a lot of chutzpah. They do what they want, and they're just on their own program. That's the one child that really frustrates the parents, and they say, maybe I'll give up. And there's another type of child that the educator will get very frustrated with. It's not just a child, it's sometimes a whole group of children, is when the situation of all of the children goes a certain way. And we know you can't swim against the tide. In the time of the 60s, the children were going with long hair and torn jeans, and nowadays we have our own styles, and certain apps we need to have on the phone, or certain type of sneakers the kids need to wear. How do you go against the tide and let's say it's something very basic in Judaism, sometimes we tend to give up because it's something that everyone's doing. And then the third time that sometimes it gets frustrating when it deals with spirituality is sometimes the children just don't connect to the subject matter. For example, we may feel spiritual when we go to synagogue or come to shul on Yom Kippur, but not necessarily where our children feel it. Or any type of ritual that we go through, the subject matter may not be that appealing to the children. That's the common denominator of these three mitzvot. These three mitzvot teach us that we might have a challenge with the type of child we're dealing with. We might have a challenge with the timing, with the generation that we're dealing with. And we might even have a challenge with the subject matter. That's probably the biggest challenge, the subject matter. What are we to do about this? The Torah tells us, in these three instances, when you feel you're the most challenged, that's when you have to teach your children. Think about it. The mitzvah of not eating creepy crawlers, vermin. The Talmud tells us that the vermin, creepy crawlers, is something that people are disgusted by. So this is definitely a character flaw in the child or the person who wants to have creepy crawlers. Still, you must teach them. And you'll overcome. And you'll overcome this challenge. And the same too, it talks about not to eat blood. In those times, we're told that the people in Egypt, where the Jewish people came from, they always drank blood. They thought it was healthy, they thought it was meaningful. So it's the tide. And you would think, how can I go against the tide? Still then we have to educate our children. The subject matter, tumah, not to defile to a dead body. Is it something you could see? Is it something you could understand? The Torah itself tells us it's a chok, something that is not understandable. It's a mitzvah that's far from our intellect. Still that we could educate our children about. That's the common denominator of all these things. When we talk about educating our children, we're not just talking about educating our children, of course. We're talking about educating ourselves, the child within us. We're living in a time when stereotypes have been shattered. All assumptions that we had till now have changed. You see, the world is trying to adapt to new realities. We have to know that there's always a way to accomplish what we need to do. The Rebbe of Kutz said a beautiful thing. We say every day in the Shema that all these things should be on your heart. And then it continues, Vishinantam, you should teach it to your children. The Rebbe of Kutsk asks, why does it say on your heart? It should say in your heart. So the Rebbe of Kutsk says, you put it on the heart of your children. You don't have to insert it. It will seep in and come in to them and they will get the message. Education is not like an ATM. You put in your card and out comes the cash. It's more like a savings account. It's a long term. I'll tell you a story. In the 40s and 50s, in this country, the look of many Jewish families was like this. You had the grandparents who were immigrants. You had the children who were still grinners. In other words, they were sons of immigrants. And the grandchildren who were adapted Americans, and they were very successful and very competitive. There's one such family who the grandson, it was his bar mitzvah, and it was time for him to prepare for his bar mitzvah. So the grandfather with the payas and the beard decided, I'm going to take you for a blessing. To who? The Lubavitcher Rebbe. They come in for an audience. The Rebbe speaks in Yiddish to the grandfather, and when he's done, he turns to the grandson. And he speaks to him in English, and the grandson is expecting maybe a Dvar Torah, maybe something about the Parsha, maybe something about the Bar Mitzvah, but instead the Rebbe asks him, do you like sports? And the boy says, of course. And what sport do you like? Baseball, he says. Do you ever watch professional baseball? He says, yeah. So he says, the Rebbe tells the boy, or asks the boy, tell me, which team wins in baseball? And the boy says, it's not about winning. I'm sorry. It's not a specific team that wins. And there's no rules in baseball. It's the team that plays the best is the one that wins. And the Rebbe took that word that the boy had just told him, and said, there's the same thing in you. There's a competition within you. You have a Yetzer Tov, a good inclination, and a Yetzer Hara, a bad inclination. And there's no rules. It's the one who plays the best is the one who's the most competitive. That's the one that's going to win. And with that, the audience was over. Fast forward 16 years, and the boy was successful in school with some sort of competition. The prize was they were going to go to New Orleans for the weekend. And he comes home proudly and tells his parents that we won this competition, we're going to New Orleans. And the parents look at the date, and that date is Yom Kippur. They explain to the boy that it's Yom Kippur, so how are we ever going to make it? You can't go Yom Kippur to New Orleans, that doesn't make sense. And the son says, I don't connect with that, it makes no sense to me, I'm going. The parents say, okay, listen, we'll leave it up to you. It's a few days before the trip to New Orleans, and he's by a friend's house. They're watching a baseball game. And it's the 9th inning, and one team is obviously winning. However, the underdog makes it at the end of the 9th inning and wins the game. And at that point, the announcer says, in baseball, there isn't any special rules. It's about the team that plays the best. And when the boy heard that, he remembered his private audience he had with his grandfather in the Lubavitcher Rebbe. We're living in unusual times. We're living in times when education is very different. Children are not going to school. They're learning online. They're learning from us. They're seeing how we behave. We need to learn to educate ourselves. And then we're able to educate others. And that is the message of this week's Torah portion. Lahazir hagdoilim alaktanim. The elders need to teach the youngers. Even when there's challenges, we go around the challenges. And just like nowadays, we go around the challenges of social distancing and we always figure out a way. We figure out a way and we will be successful in educating our children. Whether the challenge is a character flaw, whether the challenge is going against the tide of the societal norms, or whether we're talking about the subject matter that the child doesn't identify with. All of those can be accomplished even in challenging times, and specifically in challenging times, because when you're challenged, it brings out the best within you. Because the reality is, us and the child within us and the child we're educating really has good within them, and it's only our job to reveal it. We're not here to create a child, we're here to take the best out of them and teach them how to behave. Well, I wish every single one of you should have a lot of nachas from your children, and especially from the child within inside you, and have a beautiful Shabbos. Amen.